Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Janine Bruce, and I'm very excited to be here today to introduce our final MCHRI qualitative research presentation. This presentation today is on disseminating research findings, and this is with Doctors Bonnie Halpern-Felsher and Kimberly Pyke-Grimm. So the goal of today's presentation is to identify how you can take your qualitative research findings and use them to obtain feedback from your participants and community members. They will also describe different ways to present qualitative findings and then opportunities to really translate those findings into opportunities to impact practice, interventions, and policies. But before we get into the presentation, there are a few things that MCHR would like to highlight. First and foremost, we'd like to thank the Education Committee for pulling these excellent education opportunities together. We would also love for you to consider attending this upcoming event. It's an event that is going to bring together the research community at Stanford Medicine Children's Health to really foster a shared goal of highlighting and enabling breakthrough discoveries. So this event is on December 12th, so please register for this event soon. Additionally, the next upcoming MCHRI seminar is on scalable strategies for improving diet and mitigating climate change. And this is going to be with Doctors Anna Grumman and Amanda Zetlin. And then finally, please join this upcoming special event and celebration, which is going to highlight the work of Dr. Betsy Mellons and her colleagues. This event is going to focus on their work in immunology and autoimmunity and antigen presentation. And now I'm excited to introduce our wonderful guest speakers today. We have Dr. Bonnie Halpern-Felsher, who's a professor in the Department of Pediatrics and in the Division of Adolescent Medicine. She is a fabulous developmental psychologist whose research really focuses on understanding and reducing health risk behaviors among adolescents and young adults, specific to tobacco use, alcohol and marijuana use, risky driving, and risky sexual behavior. She has been on many NIH and NCI and FDA funded longitudinal studies, and her work has really um, um, uh, done so much to advance national policies. She's also the founder and director of the Tobacco Prevention Toolkit, which is an online toolkit that helps to reduce and prevent youth tobacco use. And it's so exciting that this work has been disseminated across California, the US, and I believe she mentioned some global partners as well. He's also a member of so many boards and institutes, including the National Academy of Sciences, and she's also the current president for the Society for Adolescent Health and Medicine. And in addition to all of that great work, she supervises multiple high school students, graduate and medical students across Stanford campus. And now to Dr. Pyke-Grimm. She is a nurse scientist in the Department of Nursing and Evidence-Based Practice through Stanford Children's Health. She is a clinical assistant professor in pediatrics through hematology and oncology. She is an incredibly accomplished researcher with over 30 years experience. Her research interests really spanned everything from children and adolescent health, particularly with particular attention to issues of young adults with cancer and their families, and also palliative care and clinical ethics. She teaches numerous courses in the Department of Pediatrics here and at UCSF School of Nursing, and she holds so many leadership positions related to children's oncology nationally. And she's also on the editorial board of several different journals and has received research funding from multiple sources. And I think what's so exciting about these two presenters today is not only are they very accomplished in the work that they do, but they also have extensive experience doing qualitative research. And so they're here today to really share some of their important insights regarding the dissemination of qualitative research findings. And so with that, I will pass it on to Dr. Halpern-Felsher.
Thank you so much, Janine. What sweet words. Thank you. And hi, everyone. Excited to be here. And thank you for attending. I know in the middle of December where everyone's starting to wind down. So appreciate that you're here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get us going. All right. So we are going to talk about qualitative research with the idea really being towards, we know that you've had multiple sessions already in this fantastic series, some of which actually Janine, Kim, and others have participated in, and some of you hopefully were able to attend. If not, the link to all the other talks is already in the chat. So what our goal today that we're going to do is, now that you've got your data, what do you do with it? How do you disseminate it? So we're going to talk about taking your qualitative research findings and getting feedback from your participants or your community partners. I'll focus on that. And then Kim is really going to spend a lot of time talking about different ways to actually present your qualitative findings. And then I'll come full circle to then talk about translating your findings to affect practices, interventions, and policies. So as a reminder, there are different kinds of qualitative data that you may have collected. And it really depends. And I always say, and anybody who's ever been mentored by me or taught by me, I always say, well, it depends on what your research questions are, because your qualitative data is a method to really address those research questions. But depending on your questions, what you're trying to do, what implications you're having, hopefully involved with your community partners, doing community or policy engaged research, there are many different types of qualitative data that you might have and have collected. And these may be through interviews that maybe you're doing with individuals, and it could be individual patients, adolescents that I do a lot of work with, children, people in the community at large, stakeholders at large, educators, etc. You might also be doing interviews with groups, more in the form of a focus group, and both of those will give you different kinds of qualitative data. You also might be doing observations. So going around, sometimes we call it the windshield studies, where you go around and maybe you're going into homes to code how many books they have, or you're going around doing a windshield study to see how many dilapidated buildings versus trees versus parks, et cetera, going into a school lunchroom, whatever it might be. That's more your observations. You could do a photo voice. I love doing photo voice, especially with young people, where they're going and literally taking pictures of the different, whatever it is you're studying that's out there. We've done this with tobacco. Take pictures of vapes that are out there and then tell your story around those. That would give qualitative data. You could do documents, reviews, field notes, all of those different ways to be able to collect your data. And then there are different ways to process the data. And I know that you've had talks on this, whether it's coding line by line, or using Axial, or using different forms of software to be able to code and analyze and do thematic analysis or whatever it might be. And then you might be doing memo writing around this as well. And the memo writing really could be any of the above sorts of data and sources of data, but you may want to synthesize, compare, contrast, come up with themes, do some dimensionalization or whatever else it might be. And Kim is going to really go into, on her part, how you can take all of these different pieces of data, depending on what it is, and depending on, again, on your research goals, and be able to figure out the best way to actually disseminate it and present it in posters, talks, publications, and so on. So you have your qualitative data. Now, what do you do with it? And that's the idea here. So one of the things I want to emphasize, because to me, this series has not just been on qualitative, but also on community engaged and policy engaged research. If you are doing community-based participatory research, think about the process that, often you're starting with the needs assessment with your community, and hopefully you have your community involved in every step, whether it's community researchers, patients, providers, whoever it may be, they are your community, and getting advice from them on every step. So maybe you've done a needs assessment, asset mapping, and then you have gone ahead and done your methods, your intervention, your assessment, your data collection. Now you're getting to the analysis and dissemination, and that's the part that we're going to focus on today. So when we're doing the dissemination, we're doing a little bit, well, not backwards, really. But now that you have your data, one of the things that's really, really important is that you go back to your community partners. That is important, because before you disseminate it out to the rest of the world, whether it's through a journal, whether it's through infographics, whether it's through abstracts and going to conferences, whatever it might be, podcasts, whatever, best practice with community-based work is that you go back to your community partners and you have a conversation with them to make sure that you're interpreting it correctly. So that's what we're going to talk about for my part for a few minutes. So what are we talking about, community partner feedback? We're really saying, go to your community partner. I love calling these the different ABs, your community advisory board, or we call ours our community action board. We call it our youth action board, but most people say advisory. I only say action because our CAB and YAB don't just advise, they actually create and do work with us. But whether you're talking about community or youth or parents or schools or patients, your different ABs, go back to talk to them. Review the findings with them, especially with qualitative data. This is what we found. Does it jive with what you think? And I'm going to give you an example. Fill in questions or confusion. You know what? This was talked about in the focus group, but I realize now that I'm going back to analyze it and think about it, I don't understand what people were saying. You know what? They kept using this term. I don't understand what that term is. Now, hopefully, you're actually asking them during the focus group in the interview. But when you go back to start analyzing, you may very well say, you know what? I'm not sure. I'm confused. Or maybe you want to refine it. What did this mean? Can you help me interpret the findings? I'm trying to synthesize. I'm coming up with themes. Can I show you what I came up with? And can you work with me? And I even ideally have them around the table analyzing the data with you. But making sure that you take your findings and circle back to them, define terms, synthesize, and then put the findings into context. So in my understanding group, that these are the findings that we're in agreement. Great. How do I put this into context? Policies. How does this influence your school? How does it influence your community, whatever it might be, your organization, policies, whatever it might be, circling back to them, to checking in. That's incredibly important to do. So I'm going to give you an example of how we did this with a study that we had funded by California's Tobacco-Related Disease Research Program. And this was a project to take our current, and thank you, Janine, for mentioning our tobacco prevention toolkit. We have a bunch of different drug education and prevention curriculums. And our tobacco and cannabis curriculums, we got funding to create an LGBTQ plus specific curriculum. And this is important because we know that the rates of use amongst the LGBTQ plus population are higher. Rates of use of drugs is higher. And we also know that the reasons for use are different. A lot of same, but there's some difference. There's difference around stress levels, stigma. There's also different issues if they're on hormones, gender-affirming care hormones. So we went back to the population. We have a bunch of community partners, many in Los Angeles, who are in the communities and communities working with LGBTQ youth. We did our focus groups with a bunch of youth and their parents and school administrators and teachers who are going to teach the curriculums. And we did focus groups. Then we synthesized the data or analyzed the data. And then we had a couple of fabulous sort of focus groups where we went back to participants and asked them to fill in and help us interpret our findings. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just going to give you a snippet. This was a couple-hour focus group. Let me give you a snippet of what we did. So this is the LGBTQ focus group feedback forum. These are the some examples of the actual slides we used in this Zoom meeting to get feedback. So this is the first one. And then we explained what the discussion was for. We said the study team explained who that was, reviewed the anonymous transcripts of the discussions. We organized the comments into themes. And also part of the idea also, by the way, is that we're building capacity with our community partners and our stakeholders so they know how to do this themselves. So we explained how we did it. And then we said, we want to be sure that we captured everything, that we were correct. And that's where we're coming for your feedback. And then we said, we're going to give you a bunch of slides. We organized the slides by theme. And so we're going to review the themes together. Then after each section, when we go over the themes, we go over the findings, we want to hear from you. Did we miss something? Please let us know. And we reminded them this is a safe space, especially given the topic we were talking about, but anywhere you should say this is a safe space, because people don't always want to tell professors or Stanford researchers that no, guys, you got it wrong. So really emphasizing the safe space for them to give feedback. And then say that over and over again, safe space. And then we also really made clear, because we were talking to youth, but with anybody, that we'd love to hear from them verbally, but they're welcome to share it in the chat as well. A lot of people feel more comfortable doing that, or people feel more comfortable saying, I agree, ditto, in the chat. So giving them that opportunity, either verbally, raising their hand, or in the chat. So just one example, we said, okay, here are products and health effects. That was one of the categories or themes that we had. We had that as a slide. And then we said, here are the themes and the content we came up with. And I won't bore you with reading it all. If you're interested in the topic, come on over to my lab. This is just an example. But we showed them all the different kinds of sub-themes and points that were made within that. We went through it. We explained it to them really carefully. And then, oh, thank you, Janine. And on that link isn't the LGBTQ curriculum yet. That's actually going up any day. We're really excited. This curriculum is now done and going out to the public, but the other curriculum is there. So thank you, Janine. So we did that. And then we literally had a slide that said feedback, and we paused. It is important to pause. What I do, because especially with community partners, again, they're thinking, you're the big bad Stanford. You guys are so cool. You're so cool, and you guys know it all. I don't want to give feedback. So you need to give them that space, remind them. I always say, you guys are my best people to give me feedback. I listen to you. I'm not building this for me. I'm building it for you. So I do that. And then you pause. And my strategy for pausing is I literally put my eyes around everybody. And if they're not on camera, that's fine. I do squares. I'm kind of do that with you guys right now. And I go through. And once I've gone around to hit almost everybody, I've paused long enough. So that's kind of your way of doing it. If they're on camera, pay attention to people who are starting to speak. Give them the space. There's nothing worse than going, any feedback? No? All right, great. Let's move on. Give them time and space to give feedback. All right. So any questions, please pop it in the chat. We will definitely have time at the end for more conversation. So now that you've gotten your data and you've analyzed it and you've gone to your community partners, whoever they may be, to get the feedback, make sure that you feel really good about the results. You have a sense of what they are, finalizing the thinking around there, what the implications are. Now it's your turn to present it. How do you do that? So for that, I'm going to hand it over to Kim. Kim, we don't hear you or see you, just so you know. The slides look great. We just don't see or hear you.
How's that?
Awesome. Oh,
Okay. And let me just put it in the right mode here. How's that?
looks good. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much. And I am so pleased to be here today to speak about different ways to present qualitative findings. And thank you so much, Bonnie, for that great beginning to the presentation. It really helps to set up what I'm going to say in the next 20 minutes or so. And really, what I want to talk about is the different ways to present qualitative findings. And for those of you who had an opportunity to attend some of the other lectures, you learned about different types of qualitative methods like ethnography or phenomenology or grounded theory. You also learned about different ways of collecting that data, either through one-on-one presentations or focus groups, or through surveys that have open-ended questions, or any kind of online formats or internet forums. So lots of different ways to collect qualitative data and different findings. So I'm not going to be talking about p-values or confidence intervals or anything quite like that. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you a series of examples of how data can be disseminated. So let's get started. Okay. So one of the main ways that we can do that is through the use of quotes. Now, quotes are typically used in manuscripts or in publications to really help to highlight what the data is. So these words or phrases that come from the participants are commonly used. And they helped to provide evidence for the findings through interpretation, for making sure that what the researcher has said is true to support that. They also can help to illustrate or provide concrete examples of the different concepts or ideas, and are really great at representing participants' thoughts and feelings that they through these quotations, and they help to illuminate experience as well. Now, what I want to do is to, as I said, I'm going to walk you through some of these examples, just because I want you to get a sense of all the different ways that qualitative data can be presented and disseminated. So here's one here. Now, this is a study that we conducted. It was on genomic tumor profiling, and these were high-risk children and young adults who had high-risk cancer. It was recurrent or it was rare. So we were really interested in understanding genomic tumor profiling in parents who we interviewed, as well as young adults. And just to remind people about what thematic analysis is it really is a method for developing and for analyzing and interpreting different patterns across a qualitative data set. And it involves really systematic processes of data coding to develop these themes. And these themes are really the output or the purpose of the analytic purpose. So themes are really patterns of shared meaning that are organized around a central concept. And this concept here that we looked at was genomic tumor profiling. So as I said, we did these one-on-one interviews, and this is an example here of a mother of a 5-year-old boy, how she's talking about how he likes to go to school, and that maybe considering another kind of a treatment would allow him to continue to do that. So quality of life considerations here was quite important. And it was one of the 6 themes that we came up with for this particular study. So again, here's an example of the use of a quotation to illustrate a finding. We did another study, just to give you another example of thematic analysis, where we looked at the educational needs of children with G-tubes within the first 90 days after G-tube placement. And we specifically interviewed healthcare providers because we wanted to really learn about, what were the, what types of education were they using to teach about G-tubes? What were some of the barriers, facilitators? What were some of the issues? What did they find to be effective? And we came up with 3 different themes. Again, this is building on the whole notion of thematic analysis. So staff education and training, patient and family education, and hospital to home. And you can see those were the main 3 themes with sub-themes. So this is a way of sort of presenting this either in a presentation or in a manuscript format once you come up with your findings. The graphic below that is sort of these gears that sort of illustrate that there is some interconnectedness, there is some overlap or interrelatedness. So again, sometimes visuals can be really effective in making your points. So that was a study we recently conducted. Bonnie mentioned photo voice at the beginning of her presentation, and I just want to really highlight that because I think it is a very effective data collection tool, but it can also be used to illustrate findings and can be used in manuscripts, again, as a way of disseminating the data. So let's take a look at this particular, I'm just going to share a few photos, and really a picture sometimes is worth 1,000 words, isn't it? So this was a study that was conducted in Canada by a colleague of mine, and this looking at young adults who used assisted technology. Now, these were patients who had cerebral palsy, spina bifida, visual disabilities, just to give you a sense. And they completed individual interviews both before and after engaging in this photo voice process. So individuals were provided with cameras and they were asked to take pictures of important things like places, events, or even images to represent meaningful experiences to them. And then they were asked to discuss the meaning of these things and what was ascribed to those pictures to allow them to identify different opportunities to address both social change and action. So again, this is a data collection method, but is also used in helping to present data and to include it in how you disseminate the data. The next example I'm going to go over with you is related to a study that was a qualitative analysis of observed behavior of pediatric rapid responses in a children's hospital, and they were looking at sort of team performance. So what they did was they collected field notes of qualitative data, and then they came up with these, they analyzed them. And these were over 70 individual rapid responses that took place. So then they came up with different codes and themes. Now in content analysis, one of the types, not all, but one of the types of content analysis involves some counting. So you can see here in this particular slide, they came up with these different codes. So for instance, enhances rapid response performance, they found this occurring 163 times. Now, below that, you can see there's collegiality and orderly, meaning was the rapid calm and was it efficient? So what they did was they again counted, and of those 163, 119 pertain to collegiality, but 44 pertain to orderly. So this gives you a sense of how things are related and how important some of these findings are in relation to the overall performance. So what they did was they defined it, which is so important to do in qualitative research as well. And then they gave an exemplar quotation. So this is an example of a table that helped to display their findings very effectively. The next example I want to share with you is related to grounded theory. And we talked about grounded theory and other methods in earlier presentations through MCHRI. So if you want, you can go back and look at those recordings. But just to, again, remind you what it is, it's data analysis includes different levels of coding. But what really tends to come out of grounded theory is either like a flowchart or a figure or a diagram representing that very in-depth and detailed data that was collected. So here is an example of a study that we conducted. Again, sorry, my background of pediatric hemonc is coming out very loudly in this presentation, but this study looked at parents of children with cancer who had been involved in making a major treatment decision for them. And we interviewed 15 parents and had a lot of data to manage. And what we did was because of grounded theory, you hopefully get to some kind of a theory or a figure to represent the data. This is what we came up with. So we really were able to describe the process. And for these parents, it was making the right decision for their child with cancer. So on the left-hand side of this figure, you can see how we describe sort of these antecedent factors, this motivating factors, challenges, which fed into the overarching theme, which was making the right decision, which comprised of strategies, dimensions, clinician support, and led to looking forward sort of as a bit of an outcome. So that is, again, another way of displaying qualitative data. I'm going to share with you another example of a study that we did. And Bonnie was on this study with me, which was wonderful. She was part of my dissertation committee. So this study looked at the different dimensions of AYA decision making. So these were adolescents and young adults between 15 and 20. We interviewed 16 of them, twice, all except for one. So we had a lot of data, 31 interviews to go through. And this was a focused ethnography type of a study. So we did some participant observation as well. But what we came up with was this sort of this three-dimensional model. And as you can see, just really briefly, there are three dimensions: becoming experienced, importance of decision, and decision-making roles, and how they intersect, we think. So this was a way of describing how they make, what goes into making decisions for AYAs. And early on, what you can see, just to give you an overview, is early on, they're pretty naive and they tend to participate in decisions that are more minor in terms of complexity. And over time, with experience, with practice, they tend to participate in more major types of decisions. So that sort of is, in a nutshell, what one of these diagrams that you just saw illustrates. We also took that data and we developed a heat map. Now, a heat map just is sort of a way of presenting data and showing through color what different things represent. So again, this is the three dimensions that I've already mentioned. With on the right-hand side there, you can see that the decision-making role continuum is a little bit more explained. And early on, they're more blue, they're more involved in minor types of decisions. And with time and experience and practice, they become more active. So they become more red over time. So again, just a different way of illustrating qualitative results and findings. Now, this next example I want to share with you is another example of data visualization. And Abramson and Dohan conducted a study. They are ethnographers and they are from sociology background. And sometimes the data, there's so much data, there's so much complex data, and you may have hundreds of pages of transcript, field notes, audio, and video recordings. So lots of data to have to wade through. So this they called an ethno-array. And basically it is based on 10 participants in the cancer patient deliberation study, which was what they looked at. They explored how patients move along a different treatment pathway, like clinical trials, to less aggressive palliative care as they approach end of life. What they did was they collected data through semi-structured interviews at multiple time points. They also did some direct observation. They reviewed medical record charts, and they also administered some surveys at each interview. So it was a bit of a combination of qual and quant here. But this graphical display, what it allows you to see is that it provides a way for sharing information, of seeing patterns and looking for blending of different narratives. So it allows a display of data that really facilitates really understanding relationships between different concepts or themes or data. Now, if you look at this figure along the top, you can see different numbers: 4020, 4040, etc. These are the 10 individual participants who participated in this study. And then they used color. The color-coded cells really indicate their responses. So if you look at the bottom of this graphic, you can see finances. So for instance, red signified that they were more stable financially. Blue was less stable, and then gray was sort of unremarkable. So again, through the use of color, kind of like the heat map I just showed you, you can display data. Now, what you could also do here is you could look at those different time points. So under 4020, you could have time point 1, time point 2, and compare, was there a change over time? You can also, in this kind of a way of displaying data, link in each cell to quotations that help, again, to support the findings. So again, another different way of presenting qualitative data. To build on this, there's also, I don't have a figure to show this, but there's also mapping of data. And what different mapping also helps you to do is to show relationships between maybe different themes or different concepts you're finding and have lines draw maybe to a specific major theme. And you can do that through different software programs. So for instance, Atlas TI, which helps you to manage your data, it doesn't analyze your data for you, but it helps to manage your data, has some of those features and functionality that allows you to get at a glance sort of what is this looking like, and they will come up with a figure that sort of, you might have a circle of symptom management, and you might have all the different factors, for instance, that go into it, or influencing factors, as an example. So again, another example of a way to illustrate your findings. I want to talk briefly about mixed methods research and give you an example of what that might look like as well in a manuscript or in a presentation. So mixed methods involves collecting, analyzing, and interpreting both qualitative and quantitative data. And it can be in a single study or a series of studies, but the idea is that we're trying to understand the same underlying phenomenon. And what it allows researchers to do is to really help to validate and triangulate results, which really means that you're taking different data sources and you're trying to develop a really comprehensive understanding of the phenomenon. It helps to illustrate data, examine processes, experiences, and it can be used to inform future research, which can be very useful. So here is an example of a study that we conducted, again, with AYAs. This was a study, and in this particular table, we're showing you a joint display of both qualitative and quantitative findings. So let me walk you through. So this was a study, as I mentioned, of AYAs. They were between 16 and 29 years of age with cancer, diagnosed they were within a year of their diagnosis. And we were looking at what their healthcare needs were during that time period. So we administered a survey, and you can see on the far left that one of the survey questions or topic related to their treatment. So here's an example of question 2. It's important for me to be involved in the decision-making through my treatment. Then we looked at, okay, how many of those N of 10 either agreed or strongly agreed, 100%. And then we have the theme that was also, we did a thematic analysis, participating in decisions and self-management behaviors. And then we gave an exemplar quotation. So this is an example of how you can combine and integrate data that are both qualitative and quantitative in nature. Lastly, and I know we're giving you a lot of information here, and we'll take a pause after all of this, but I want to talk briefly about other methods of dissemination. So when you're creating an abstract or writing an abstract for a conference, or when you're giving a poster presentation or an oral or podium presentation, and just highlight a few tips to help in being effective with those types of presentations and dissemination. So here, this particular abstract builds on the three-dimensional model that I showed you earlier. And you can see here that oftentimes there's a title, and if you can, and if you have the space, to include what type of a study it is. And it's also always helpful to say it's either a mixed method study or the type of study that it is. It helps the reader to understand the nature of the design. And then we move into the background and purpose section, which is really, stating why the study is important, and includes the population and the purpose. Again, for the methods, this is a very brief methods. This could be beefed up for sure, but it's important to include in that section. In this case, it was focused ethnography, the design. We used the framework of symbolic interactionism. We conducted interviews, and we also used informal participant observation. So again, these are all qualitative types of important methods and design information here. The highlights of the findings would include things that are different from a typical quantitative type of a study. Again, you would describe your population, how many participated, but then you would get into things like what were the themes that were identified or that emerged, or in this case, it was these 3 dimensions and the heuristic model that was developed. And then important takeaways is your conclusions and implications. And in this case, it's highlighting how important it is to consider AYA's preferences, encourage their involvement, but also a little bit about what future research will entail, testing the model and seeing how these three dimensions interact. Also, when it comes to creating a poster, we're moving on to poster now, it's always important to have a template that represents your institution, the colors, the logos, all of that. Now we have on our Research and EBP website, we house this type of these templates to so that people can just download them and use them for conferences or presentations. So just wanted to share that. But here is also a poster that Bonnie and I did. I think it was for an MCHRI conference one year. But again, just to highlight a few things here. This is a bit of a busy poster, but a few things are to highlight, of course, font size, and that bullet points always make it less dense in terms of the content. I think including graphics that are large enough and are legible are also important. Like, for instance, probably a something that I would avoid in the future would be to have this table here related to the participant characteristics. This is really hard to read. So that would be an example of something that probably would be good to avoid. People these days are also including QR codes, which are helpful in housing your references or other supplemental information there that you can just put right on the poster. And your poster should stand alone. It should be able to be understandable without you having to sort of stand there and walk people through it. So that's always important to keep in mind, is that, does it stand alone? Can people understand what we did for this research if they were just to read through it? But it's also important to have a good 2-minute elevator kind of a speech. So if someone is standing in front of you, you can just give them a good overview or synopsis of what you did, and to be brief and to be clear. And then finally, in terms of an oral or podium presentation, again, these are the typical elements of a poster presentation. I think just a few tips here is that when it comes to qualitative research or quantitative research, you don't want to spend too much time on the background. You want to spend enough time on the results and the discussion. Now, if you have preliminary results, it's always good to spend time on the methods if you don't have a lot of data to share. But just those are just a few tips on how to give presentations. So I am now going to turn it back to Bonnie. So we'll take a brief pause here.
Thank you. Kim, if you don't mind stopping sharing, please.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was fantastic information. That was beautiful. All right, let me go to my slides again. All right, pulling this back up. All right. So now you've gone through, you've collected your data, you've done some initial analyses, you've then shared it with your community partners. Hopefully that is a process that you're able to do, assuming you have community partners. You may or may not gotten some ideas there. And then you've Kim did a fantastic job of giving you different ways to disseminate it, particularly to a research audience, or how to disseminate the findings themselves. Then I'm going to take it to the next step of further dissemination into policies, infographics, flyers, and so on. So these are just some quick examples. We could go into an entire hour or two just on how do you create, what resources do we have? So I'm just going to give you a little taste, and then always happy to talk further about this. And shout out to Anisha Patel for this slide. This is also a whole talk in and of itself. But when you think about dissemination beyond the research community, you could be going back to your community partners and giving talks to them, which is fantastic. So they've been in the early stage of helping you refine your findings and solidify what it is you want to say in your messages. But then you can also go back to, and should go back to them, give them that poster that Kim just talked about. Leave it with them if you can. They love to have findings up in their hallways or whatever their organization allows and has space for. Maybe you're going to present to an MCHRI conference, hint, hint, or another conference with your community partner. Circling back to your community partner to actually present with them is really wonderful. The other is you may go beyond your academic institutions, MCHRI, other societies, and also disseminate to policymakers, to to educators, to other people, depending on who your wider stakeholder might be. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit here. You take those findings. And by the way, this is true for quantitative as well, but qualitative, just because it has those voices that Kim was talking about so beautifully, because it has those voices, it lends itself beautifully to be able to go to a policymaker, to go to a federal partner, state partner, a local partner, and say, here are the voices people are telling us. Here's some of the data that are so important to us. Let's now talk about how do we present it to impact change. All right, so here are just some examples, and like Kim, I'm going to show a lot of examples from my own work, but just some examples of work that we've done where we've taken qualitative findings, and it may be qualitative research, it might also be just qualitative needs assessment work, and we've turned them into various infographics that we have online on our toolkits, as well as sharing them with our community partners. So these are just a few, and we have somebody, you can do these, we do them in Canva. I'm not a pro at Canva, but my lab is. Getting somebody who could do that, they're beautiful. And I've had everywhere from children, teenagers, parents, healthcare providers, policymakers say that they're really clean. The purpose of these is not to give everything in an infographic or in a flyer or a policy brief, just little bits that catch their attention, give the highlights, and then moves it into, if you want more information, go here. So these are just some examples that we've done. Another one, oh, sorry, I repeated one, is fentanyl is a big issue right now. We do something here where it's just snippets of the research that's out there in the field, not just our research. And then we have a QR code that links to either more information or to the curriculum, depending on what it is. But very clean, very colorful. And by the way, we actually have our YABs and our CABs create these, and then we share or give us ideas, and then we share it back with them to make sure that what we're creating is going to work. Because when you're disseminating to your partners, to your policymakers, they don't want to read a huge, 20-page research paper. So you want to make sure that what you are creating sings to them. There's just a few more that we've done on disseminating cannabis research to people. And these are a kind of what do you want to know? They all come under a theme that we have, and they're very similar. So that way people feel like there's a theme to all of the messages that we're trying to give. The other thing that you could do are policy briefs. So this is a way of taking qualitative research and quantitative, but just a couple of examples with the idea that you can take research and distill it down to a often one-page bullet. So it's a more detail, more information than what's in an infographic, but still this idea of 1, 2, 3 pages of a brief, lots of bullets that's pointing to the research, but in more bite-sized chunks that you can give to people to affect change. And then you would still reference a primary research paper that you will have done, so qualitative paper. And the other thing that's really important to realize is that you can use, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a global way, but social media, those quotes and those heat maps that Kim was talking about are fantastic to put out on social media. And you can do that. And these are not, this is from the Office of Child Health Equity, and we've done some of this work, but often I've taken some of our research findings, put it on social media, clip just a little bit of the actual paper, but then had a brief infographic with a link to the actual paper, and we put it on social media. And we'll say, this is implication 4. We just did a paper on the legal age of purchasing tobacco, which is 21, not 18. And many people in our research study didn't understand that. We created, I should have brought those in, but they're on our website. We created an infographic around tobacco 21 with links to the research at the bottom, and we are then giving those to policymakers, parents, schools, and so on to get the word out. So you can take that social media and also distill it down into a smaller, whatever, 250 characters or whatever it is now, so that way you can get that information out there. And then just to And other ways that you can disseminate your research, qualitative or otherwise, but I love doing this with qualitative research because that's your story. And when you're going to do advocacy and really affect change, those stories make a difference. So the infographics are brief. I talked about those, but public comments, or writing letters to the editor, or writing letters to, or emails to legislators to really either support or refute some policy, some Senate bill, some assembly bill, whatever it might be, to really say, I'm doing this on behalf of the 50 patients I just interviewed, or the 100 people I just did a focus group, or whatever it might be, to be able to do that and do it in a way that you are representing their voices, and use that to go out and talk to policymakers, talk to advocates. It is so incredibly powerful to be able to do that. I've used this with testifying or emails or whatever it might be to be able to do advocacy work. So I just kind of ending on a hopeful positive note of not that it was negative before, but a true positive empowerment note of take your research findings, take your scholarship findings, take your stories, take your observations, your windshield observations, whatever it might be, distill it into something that's bite-sized, and colorful and interesting, and get it out there to affect change, and do so with your community partner, because that's really going to make a difference. On that, lots of time for questions. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you for that really wonderful presentation and all of the different opportunities to think about disseminating and displaying data.
Dr. Pyke, I'm sorry for being off camera. I'm not quite camera ready, but I did have a question about the advocacy work, and I'm not sure if you went into detail about this already, but what do you suggest as best practices for translating really complex data for advocacy purposes? You know, which particular methods would align best with advocacy?
Bonnie, you probably have the most experience with advocacy and in doing that work.
So the question is, what specific methods align better with advocacy, or ways of presenting it?
Ways of presenting.
Oh man, Janine should chime in here as well. I think we're all going to have different perspectives. I mean, like I said, the stories. I would say briefs and infographics. I think the heat maps that you were presenting, Kim, and some of those more complicated are probably our policymakers have an attention span of about 3 seconds, right, Janine? We often talk about it that way. You know, I would say heat maps and things, fabulous, and I love them for publications and for dissemination to your more scientific audiences. I think if we're going to be doing it for a policymaker, I would go with quotes. I would go with bullet points, and I would do some pretty graphics of some sort. I wouldn't get too complicated. Is that answering the question, or did you want more? I just
No,
want to make sure.
totally. That's very helpful.
And
Okay.
maybe I could just chime in there too. I lead one of the international initiatives on returning research results through the Children's Oncology Group. And I think the more we can create lay summaries for studies and present that and use that as a tool as well to educate people, which could help to encourage and promote advocacy work as well. If we can take those study findings, in the case that I do a lot of work in is related to clinical trials, but even in any kind of a study through the use of like what Bonnie showed in terms of the infographics, and they're doing that a lot more in publications as well. They're sort of saying just, you know, summarize these study results in a very simplistic way, in a lay summary way, and use that to educate people. I think that will go far in terms of their understanding of study results, but then to the next level of even advocacy and being able to articulate why that study finding or study findings is important in the advocacy work.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Excuse me, I have kind of a related question. Um, when you present some of these findings, whether they be quotes or themes and in an infographic or other way, how does that impact your ability to publish those findings later? And what might you need to disclose to in a letter to the editor, if at all?
It's a great question. Kim, you want to take that? You want me to?
Well, again, you've probably had more experience than I with this. I mean, I can make a comment when you're finished, but I think there
Sure.
is an issue in some ways. Yeah.
So it's a fantastic question, and one that I grapple with a lot, because if you're a policy researcher, you want to get it out. So in short, if I'm going to try to give specific information and data to policy folks, I try to wait till it's published.
Yeah.
Like the Tobacco 21 paper that I just mentioned, which took a little longer to get published than I was hoping. I waited because the data were, I was going to be able to do something like, want to be able to say 40% of people don't understand the legal age. That's a very specific number that's only attributable to a study. Now, this was quantitative, not qualitative, but the answer is the same. And I really didn't want us to scoop ourselves and get it where we're not allowed to publish. So I waited. I will tell you that a lot of people, I work a lot with the FDA, Center for Tobacco Products, for example, and they won't even listen to us until the paper's published anyway, because it has to go through peer review before they're going to be willing to do that. Now, having said that, there are, and I'm grappling with this right now because not for policymakers, but people want to know that our curriculums are evidence-based, which we have lots of data, but it's not all published. So can we put it on our website to say evidence-based with our data? So what we're doing there is we're keeping it vague. We're saying our studies show that you're more likely to increase knowledge and decrease intentions without giving actual numbers, because we have a body of research to show that. So it's not one specific paper. I'll let you know in 6 months if we get dinged for that. But that is our goal. The third piece on this, and then I'll stop babbling, is with things like policy briefs and public comments. We do a lot, and I know the Office of Child Health Equity does this too, where you talk about policy briefs. So say the FDA is debating on a policy, they have to give at least 30 days to the public to comment. Those are not, they don't care if it's peer reviewed or not. And sadly, they don't even care how accurate it is. You can put in a policy, public comment. So those, we will do preliminary data and we will say it's preliminary data. And sorry, one more, and then I'll stop talking, I promise. The stuff, Kim, that you were talking about, like posters and stuff, you're always allowed to present research to a conference. That is always allowed. And I've actually said, I've had some policymakers who want to take early work from us. And I've said, invite me to a conference and then I can present whatever it is you want me to. So that's been my trick. If I have to try to get something out before I'm allowed to do it. So anyway, Kim, please take it from there.
You know, that's great. That's so helpful. One thing just to add, just a minor point, when it comes to disseminating to the public, like we do for clinical trials, and this is just an example, is what we promote is to do it concurrently with the manuscript being developed. So we say to the team, please develop the manuscript alongside the lay summary so that hopefully when the publication comes out, it won't be long after that people can receive the lay summary about the study results so that there's not a lag time in them finding out, because that's really important to people who participated in clinical trials, as an example, to get that information and to be able to disseminate that information in that way. So that's sort of where we've kind of landed with the work that we do right now. That's just an example.
Totally. Janine, if it's okay, there's a great question in the chat on CAB. So we have actually not only included CAB, we've included YAB, our youth, including a 17 and an 18-year-old on papers. We do that a lot. And we still have the same standards. They have to make a substantive contribution. We often have our CABs and YABs code, either qualitative or more thematic coding or just codes of different sorts. Ads, we do a lot of tobacco ad coding, and they'll do that. And then as long as they also review the manuscript and offer comments and uphold, we've had them as second and third authors. I've had our YAB. Unfortunately, some of the conferences you have to be 18, but I've had them come with us to present things like the local pediatric conference or MCHRI conference on campus. Sometimes they're the presenters. So I would definitely encourage that. You do have to be careful if your YAB or CAB are looking at identified data, which focus groups and qual can sometimes be, then they should be city trained and all the research ethics. But some of the coding doesn't require that. So that's kind of a case by case basis. But I've had them be complain. We work with the Hawaii Community Foundation to create a Hawaii version of our curriculum. And we have some data with them, and they're going to be authors on it. That's a great question.
And I've done that too, where I've included parents who have been involved in the study design and have reviewed interview guides for us and have been involved in some of the early analysis, participate as co-authors as well. And I think that's really a nice addition to the author lineup when you can do that when they've participated. The other thing I want to just mention really quickly is member checking, and I know Bonnie alluded to this, during her part of the presentation, and I think that's such an important part of qualitative research when you have come up with some preliminary analysis and you take it back to the participants and you say, hey, does this resonate with you? Did we capture what you were trying to say? Again, you're trying to give voice to your participants in a way that they get to say, yeah, that rings true to me, or it doesn't, or that kind of thing. And I find that very effective as well. It also just helps to feel like you're on the right track. You're really being honest and true to the data. So again, just another technique that we use to try and support rigor in qualitative research.
Yeah, 100%. Doug makes a great question there in the chat. We're right now, we have a huge project, a randomized control trial with a community partner, and it's a 50-50 with a randomized control trial. That's crazy. We're building capacity in that we're teaching them about IRB. We're actually going to have them hopefully consent is the idea, because it's for kiddos who were found using drugs. So we are not having parental, thankfully, IRB. Thank you to the IRB gods for giving us parent waiver. That was a fight. That's another conversation. It was quite a fight, but we got it. If anybody's on here from IRB, thank you. So we're building their capacity to learn how to consent. We're trying to figure out if they have to do city training. That's a conversation we're still having, but we're doing that. We're teaching them about surveys and collecting survey data, because they're going to have to do that on site for us. Our main community partner, the California School-Based Health Alliance, has never had a grant this size. It's a huge project and a huge grant. So we're working with them. They're asking basic questions to us, but things like, how do I do a progress report? How do I do billing? How do I do invoicing back to the funders? Those are things that, for someone like me who's eats, drinks, sleeps grants, seems pretty obvious, which obviously that's not how I approach it to them. I say, that's a fantastic question. Let me help you with that. To them, that capacity will allow them to be a partner on the next grant, and know how to do this. So, and we're also just building capacity in how do you ask questions? How do you not do things that are unethical by accident, like suddenly going from $20 incentives. I had that once with a community partner. They said, by the way, Bonnie, we just doubled the incentive. I hope that was okay. And I'm like, no, you got to talk to IRB. So building those capacities of the do's and don'ts are really important.
Looks like Christopher has a question.
Yeah, hi. Sorry for the background noise on my end. I was wondering about this question of capacity building. In order for groups to take like more control over time or like more autonomy of like public health messaging. Um, yeah, and how to learn how to do that capacity building a bit. Like I'm on the phone with like this group of Rohingya refugees like every week, and it would be really helpful if they had some more structure. But I also like want to be mindful of my own like in the own power dynamics that I have as like researcher from Global North coming in and saying like, hey, this might be helpful, but how do you? And also, I don't even know what like how to think about capacity building in a more like regimented way as to how do we go about this and a group of strangers coming together to like a community organization with the capacity to take on grants.
I would say, and please others chime in, it depends on what you're building the capacity on. It sounded, if I could understand you, Christopher, you were partly like them being advocates. I mean, I would give them, I have my standard, I do a lot of advocacy around getting flavors out of tobacco or cannabis. I have my standard 2-page talking points that I just give it to people and say, revise it as you wish. And then I'm happy to look at it again. Versus the other way, where if they write it first and then you redline it completely, you're going to hurt their feelings more. I think if you give them some examples and say, you do this as you wish, I'm here to help you if you want, I think probably goes a long way. And a lot of community partners are going to say, no, really redline it and help me. But I think examples, having them practice, we have our YABs and our CABs practice with us. We do a whole thing with youth on how do you be an advocate, and they love that. How do you come partner with me, and I'll give the first 2 minutes of the presentation and you do the second 2 minutes. And then empowering them, that's the biggest thing. Community partners go with a bunch of MDs, PhDs, masters, bachelor's level people, and the community partners go, oh, again, you're the big Stanford I can't live up to, and I'm afraid to disappoint you. I've gotten a lot of those kinds of comments. And so empower them, and when I give my advocacy talks, I spend half of the talk reminding young people how important their voices are. And so a lot of it's not just what they're saying, but empowering them to know that they're worth it, important, and that their voice makes a bigger difference in a lot of ways than us professors and academics would. I don't know if that's specific enough, but.
And we have a follow-up question on the chat.
Kim, do you want to take that one? I mean, I can, but I want to make sure.
So it's explaining the research design and study elements and things like that. You have more experience with the CAB, so if you've covered that in your previous work, go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, in this case, either CAB or like our California School-Based Health Alliance, which isn't a CAB, they're like co-PIs on this project, but they are our community partner. We've created, it's a great question because, you say randomized controlled trial and you'll be randomized based on these 5 things and match. They're going, what? So we've created little slide sets for them, and we just do lots of pictures. So we get 20 schools and we randomize based on these factors, and 10 will go to the treatment and 10 will go to the control, and then the 10 treatment will do this and the 10 control will do this, and then we flip it to the control become treatment. We literally just do a diagram, give them the grant. I'm a big believer in you should share your grant with people. If it's funded, they have a right to look at it. Unless you've got some real proprietary information, which most of us on this talk don't. But if you do, some cell line or something, cross it out, fine. But give it to them, but then give them 1-pagers or slide sets to explain it. And then that's a great capacity building. We've done talks on what is a randomized controlled trial? What do I mean by that? Why is it important? I have to go to trials.gov. What does that mean? Or what is what's a Senate bill? What's an assembly bill? So diagrams, making it simple, and then really explaining each component works really well. And we do that with the CAB too. Always link it back to your research question. or your advocacy question or your policy question. It's really important to go back to that because that's the so what. And I always say, pull at their heartstrings. Why is this important? And that way they have the buy-in as well. I don't know, others chime in.
If you're talking about participant understanding of different types of designs, like what is an RCT, or what does that mean when you say you're gonna flip a coin, and my child is going to be randomized to arm A or arm B. If you're thinking at that level, we sometimes have roadmaps, what we call roadmaps for different protocols, where we would show the visual of it, like, if this happens, this is the arm they're going to go on. This is where, and this is what randomization means. I think teaching that whole concept of what that means is really important. And the other thing that we've used with our patients as well, in terms of enrolling them on trials and things, and helping them to understand, is a study summary. So it might be a 1 or 2 1-page lay summary of what is entailed with the study, so that they are able to take maybe what might be a 10-page consent to really have a 1-page summary that sometimes helps them understand what is involved in that trial. So those are other strategies to use if you're talking about patients, for instance, and enrolling them.
And Kim, that's a great point. I mean, the thing I was talking about, the diagrams, we also distill it down to 1 page for our research participants and their parents as well. So I love that. The other thing we've done is a video. Sometimes when you're trying to consent a participant for any study, whether they're English or non-English speaking as their primary language, a little video, because the IRB forms 10, 12 pages now. It's crazy. And so we've distilled it down and said a little video from me, and then said, and in that, really your main things to look at are page 10, there's a signature, page 12, there's a signature. You have to be careful because you don't want to imply, don't read the first 10 pages. That's not the point, but sort of what are the bottom lines, and then what do they need to do? Because I have found participants get so overwhelmed by the information. We forget, we talk science. That's not something that they're thinking about on a daily basis.
The great questions. Love the conversation.
Agree. And if anyone else has experiences on this Zoom, please chime in with,
Please share.
We're not the end all. I learned from you as well. Definitely explain IRB to people, in particularly qualitative, honestly, what it means, why it's important, and what they are and are not allowed to do. Like I said, that I literally had a community partner, this is years ago, who called me up or emailed, so it was in writing, and said, we just doubled the incentives, hope you don't mind. Or another one, a lawyer, emailed me and said, we forgot to consent the last few participants. No, don't do that. Don't forget, and don't email me that you forgot. So there's just a lot of things like that, a little bit of education to them would be really good. The other thing is if you're doing any research on anything, I'm going to try not to be political, but that might be more controversial right now. I do a lot of work on substance use, being the president of my organization for adolescents. We do a lot of work on gender affirming care, abortion rights. We don't put anything in writing anymore. We pick up the phone and call. So if you're going to do anything on the dissemination side, just be aware of that. I don't know, MCHRI group, that actually might be a really nice talk to give, like disseminating findings and policies in this world. I've got more experiences in the last year that I want to talk about, given being president of SAHM. So.
Yeah, thank you, Bonnie. I think that's a great suggestion for our next step, talking like maybe we can have a individual workshop focused on the policy demand advocacy part. So any other like last minute question, the last questions or you have, or things you would like to share as well. It's not only question, like, because I know you also have a lot of experience and story. We would like to learn from you as well.
Bang Mei, I have a question. This is Annette.
Great. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Great presentation. Bonnie, Kim, fabulous. I really love the way this seminar sort of rounded out the whole seminar series on qualitative research. And I really want to say thank you to MCHRI to really giving us this time to educate our partners and our colleagues on qualitative research. So thank you for that. Great presentation. In the way, I have one really quick question, and I don't want to take too much time, but in the way of dissemination, and I don't know, Bonnie or Kim, if you have any thoughts on this, do you ever get back to the participants that participated in your study? And how, what types of strategies do you use to share your findings or your publications with the adolescents or the parents or the that you spoke with?
Kim, do you want to take that?
Well, we do through that work I mentioned previously about the clinical trials and return of results. That's not qualitative per se, but it's the same notion of creating a summary, a lay summary, and we do disseminate that actually on a public website. So it is accessible to not just the patients and the families or relatives, but it's for providers and everyone. So we have close to 100 that we've developed now and that are available. And I'm a proponent of us taking that model and doing it for all research, you know, so that there is some kind of a lay summary that's available, so that, because we do have patients who say, what did you find? Whatever happened to that study? What were the results? You know, and they want to hear. And oftentimes I will do that individually. And I will, you know, they'll ask me and I will go over things. And then if the publication has come out by then I will say, you know, if you want to see it, you know, you could look it up in PubMed or, you know, make it available kind of thing that way. So that's how my experience has been.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm thinking more
Very
of just
similar.
individual studies, right? That you have, you know, I mean, your return results, Kim, is fabulous work. I'm just curious about your own individual sort of, you do interviews with groups of 30 kids or 30 adolescents or, you know, the kids in tobacco. And do you ever get back to them? I'm just curious. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the ways that we've been talking about, like, one is what I was saying at the beginning, where we literally go back and Kim used a better word than I did.
Not member checking necessarily.
No. Yeah.
But yeah, so we'll do that. But then we also will actually give them the publication, we do newsletters a lot. And newsletters go out to not always our participants, but any of our community partners, sometimes our participants. A lot of my studies lately, which are more quantitative as well as qualitative, if they're big, massive, like surveys to 6,000 people, anonymous, obviously I can't do that. But if it's a qualitative, we absolutely will circle back and give them the results. We are a little bit careful. I will tell you a couple situations where we won't. We've done some studies on, say, this was a little more quant than qual, but it was actually mixed methods around sexual behavior. This was many years ago. We found out that it was, I don't remember, like 20% of the ninth graders that had sex. And this was back when I was in the other institution up the street. My division chief went, please do not tell the schools that. And I was like, yeah, good point. Like, if they found the paper, fine, but I wasn't going to hand them up because I didn't want the parents to go, is it you, Johnny? Is it you, Sally? So there are times where I will be a little bit careful. And that's when I will bundle the research more into like the infographics or the best practices or a newsletter, and then give that out instead of individual papers. And I never put in papers, and this is a really good message to everybody, where I got the participants from, qual or quant. I never say, except for Qualtrics, like big panel studies, but I never say, you know, Balboa High School or Gun High School or anything. I've seen that, and it's, to me, the biggest no-no, especially for qualitative. I'll do schools in the Bay Area or schools in California. I make it really careful, and that way it's plausible deniability. So I work a lot with lawyers, but it also, yeah, it just saves them. But I love circling back through newsletters or anything else is so important to do.
Yeah, thanks for that.
I think we need to be more deliberate in doing that with our participants, because they do, I mean, they volunteer to do this most times or get a very small token of appreciation. But I think that it is nice to be able to put together, a summary that we could send to them if they want it at all. They might not, but mostly my experience is when a patient has come to me or a participant and they've said, "Hey, Kim, what did you find in that study?" And then I'll say, here's sort of the bigger picture. This is what we have found. And give them a summary that way. It's more verbal than anything typically. And they're usually fine with that. They just want to know what happened.
Exactly.
What'd you find?
Yeah. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you. I know if we do not have any more questions, I would like to remind everybody as well, like this workshop is recording and we'll post online along with all other the previous qualitative research workshops. So feel free to check back anytime you would like to visit or even to learn something new, and then you can check our website. So I will post on our on the chat again, and then later on, I think Netta will also send out a recording to everyone, so you can have it on your for your record. And also, like, this is not the end of the conversation. We will keep going, like, to learn more about all this quantitative research method, and then next year we can think about like any other like topic you are interested in, and then we can put together. Like, I know the health policy always something people keep asking and would like to learn more. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.